Welcome to the 6th episode of the A to D podcast. I'm David Hain, and I'm happy you're with us. I'm going to get right to it today because we have the first of a two-part interview with a good friend of mine, Danny Cosby. And I could give tons of introductions to him. He's an international recording artist, a singer, a songwriter, a preacher, a public speaker, an author, and on and on and on. But to cut it a little bit shorter, I'll just ask Danny to introduce himself. So Danny, let's make it short also. If you found yourself on an elevator with someone, how would you introduce yourself to them?
Man, I don't know if I can live up to all of those titles that you just dropped. But I appreciate it. Man, it's good to be here talking to you. There's this old statement that an old preacher said a long time ago, and it really hit me. And I say this in a lot of places that I go just to kind of set it up the way I like to feel about it. And I would say, first, I probably wouldn't introduce myself to somebody in the elevator because they'd probably freak out. But if I had to, if we got stuck on floor 6.5 or something, I would say, man, I'm just a nobody trying to tell everybody about somebody that could save anybody.
Amen. Good introduction. And let's give your contact information up front in case anybody wants to check out on their own and find more out about this Danny Cosby.
Man, I appreciate that opportunity. Thankful for my wife to have laid all these platforms out. I didn't know how to turn a phone on before I met her. And she got me set up with, you can find me on Facebook, just Danny Cosby Music Ministries. I'm on Instagram, Danny, DANNY _ Cosby, COSBY. I'm on Twitter. I don't know how to find myself on Twitter, but my wife knows all of that. So I figured you just type my name in on there. You can go to YouTube, type my name in there. We got a ton of documentaries and music videos we've had an opportunity to do. And last but not least, we've got a website you can go to. It's just DannyCosbyMinistries.com, and that'll take you everywhere to find out how to do or help us do what it is we're doing these days.
Okay, thanks so much. And I just want to encourage the listeners to get on board and check Danny out. You will be amazed by his story and his life and the impact that he is making, not only in Memphis, but around the world. So check him out. I guess to get into the story, I just want to ask you right up front, what's a nugget of wisdom that you have learned through your lifetime and through the experiences that you've had that you would want to pass along to our listeners?
Man, there's 5 things that I tell inmates when I go to, I like to call them residents. Inmates kind of got a harsh tone to it. If I talk to people in addiction at treatment facilities, the homeless shelter, the Lord gave me 5 things that I carry with me everywhere. He gave them to me 7 years ago. I've been out of prison 10 years. And the first one, and these 5 things, nuggets of wisdom, if you will, they are intertwined with my testimony. But I'll just lay down the things for anybody listening and taking notes. And really appreciate you having me on here, Dave. And anybody listening, man, we're just glad you're here listening. The first one is don't despise the days of small beginnings. Number 2, you must have a vision of yourself succeeding. It's not an option. You need to see yourself not as a failure, but as a success. What does that look like? Number 3, learn to be okay with it just being you and God. And I know a lot of us listening may not have a relationship with God. We might have a skewed vision of him. I did for sure. Thought he was a judge until I found out otherwise when I landed on my back in a homeless shelter. But had to be okay with it being just me and him. 4 or 5 would be there's no replacement for hard work. You got to go after this thing. David, you didn't write a book because somebody else did it for you. You had to do it. And 5 and final, quitting is not an option. I've wanted to quit this week for several different reasons. Yesterday was a horrible day for my wife. Long story short, but you can't quit. You gotta take a deep breath and do the next best thing.
Awesome stuff. I asked for a nugget, and you gave me a whole handful of gold, like I'm panning on a river there.
There you go. Shake the pan,
Yeah,
baby.
yeah, good stuff. And you mentioned some things that would lead into some of your story. And one of the things you said right at the beginning was when I'm talking to guys in prison. And do you want to share a bit of your life and how you ended up? Was it Bunk 51?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. And yeah, man, it really was. We were able to release an album of all the songs I wrote in prison. A lot of y'all probably going, well, what's your story? I was locked up mainly because of everything. If you want to just be real quick about it, because I know we don't have a lot of time, the thread that weaved my life into homelessness and addiction was rooted and grounded in a heroin and a crystal meth addiction, which was rooted in a heart wound that I had down deep in my heart that was connected to my father, my earthly father, who I love now and always have loved, but we didn't see eye to eye on things, and words were said, hearts were broken, and you don't want to hurt, so you go do what you got to do to fix the pain. And I went after drugs. That addiction led me down a pathway of being a thief that led me to homelessness. The next thing you know, I'm facing 20 years in prison for stealing stuff. Served 4 years in prison, got out November 24th, 2009, been out ever since. And I spend my life now, it didn't start out, I didn't just jump into prison ministry. Like I got out of prison and said, man, I'm gonna go back and save the world. It was small beginnings, was me cutting hot wings for $8 an hour and trying to figure out how to make ends meet so I can pay my parole fines, so I can ask my mom and dad to drive me to my parole officer, and then taking another job putting car engines up that a guy pulled out of an engine, and just doing whatever I had to do to make ends meet. And then eventually, by the grace of God, I was able to have enough money saved, done the right thing with my money, met my wife. She helped me learn how to manage my money. We built a life together for the last 10 years, 9 years of marriage. And now I'm able to do full-time ministry. But it all started cutting hot wings, man, in a little hot wing shop in Memphis, in Millington, Tennessee. And dude, I was cutting hot wings one day. I was so happy to have a job because I heard that an inmate wouldn't be able to get a job for 3 months out of prison. I got a job in 2 days washing dishes and cutting hot wings. And so I'm cutting hot wings one day, talk about small beginnings. And I'm just singing Amazing Grace while I'm cutting them, right? And, that little feeling you get when somebody's standing behind you or near you, looking at you.
And it wasn't the chicken staring.
No, it might have been. There might have been some kind of spiritual transcendence of the chicken we were about to eat, looking at me like, I can't believe you're doing this, man. But no, it was the guy that hired me, and I'm singing Amazing Grace. I love to sing, so I kind of tie singing and thankfulness with everything, whether I'm painting a house or whether I'm preaching a sermon or whatever. And so while I was singing, I turned and look, and he's standing there, and he's got this bewildered look on his face, and he said, man, I've never seen anybody that happy cutting hot wings. I'm sorry, I'm going to need you to pee in this cup. So I take the cup, pass the drug test, come back, and he's like, man, who are you? And there we go. I'm a nobody trying to tell everybody about somebody. And it was just a really cool, it was a series of peeing in cups, and people wondering how could somebody be this happy doing such mundane work. But it's I'm probably getting way ahead of myself, but it was just there's real joy once you I know a lot of your podcasts are about coming out of addiction, and when I came out and I saw the light, I realized, man, I could see my wound in the light. I couldn't see my wound in the dark, and when I could see my wound, God sent people like you into my life to help me figure out how to get it healed.
Amen. Amen. And it's funny you mentioned the guy asking you to give him urine, in the hot wing shop. That's one place you would think the stigma would not have followed you. The stigma of
Right,
addiction, the
right.
stigma of being recently incarcerated, the stigma of being a convicted felon. Is that stigma sort of the biggest hurdle that you've had to keep jumping over after your release from prison, or what would you say some of your hurdles were?
I would say the biggest hurdle personally was fear and doubt that I was ever going to do anything with my life that I would consider being successful. You fear that you're going to go back to prison because you hear about the statistics of 78 to 88% going back in 3 to 6 months. And so I was excited about being out, but I was scared to death about when am I going to get out of my parents' house? When am I going to get some kind of gainful employment and get my own place and get my own car and build a life? But yeah, I say from the outside looking in, there's definitely a wall you come up against when you've got a record or when you've had an addiction to anything and people find out about it. They almost can't help themselves but to, in a sense, feel safe about prejudging who you are. And it makes sense. It makes sense that they've got to be that way because they've got a business to protect or a family or a church to protect. I mean, I was rejected, no offense to churches, but I was rejected by churches to be on their worship team. And finally, but I look back over all of that and the stigmas that do follow, that do the labels people put on you. It's actually kind of a strength for the individual that supposedly wears the label because it gives you an opportunity. Not that you got to prove yourself to anybody, but it gives you an opportunity to show people in the long run that you are not that anymore. That doesn't define you. And I've noticed from guys that I've mentored who've gotten out of prison, and I've walked with them outside of prison, that their joy comes from going, man, I've been out this long, and look at what I'm doing. I'm not that guy that I used to be.
Mm. Yeah, and it's not proving it to other people. It's just being able to say, I used to be that guy, but as you face those hurdles and overcome them, as you face those stigmas and keep your cool rather than lash back out in anger and rage, I think it just keeps building our confidence in recovery to say, I don't have to go back there anymore.
Absolutely. I've got a story, I'll share a brief story that just kind of ties into what you just said very intimately well, or however you want to say it. And I love my dad, man. He is my best friend, but he in a heartbeat, he'll say, dude, use me in any way you can, my goods and my bads, my mess ups, my cleanups. There was a time I'd been fresh out of prison, about maybe 3 weeks. I was staying at their house and I was driving a car that they had gotten for me, and I had to save enough money to get insurance for it and get it street safe. So I get it all set. It was an old Buick that you had to start with a screwdriver. So it was hilarious. Every time I'm starting it, it looks like I'm stealing a car. But here I am. I'm driving it, and I don't know what happened, but I guess there was a marijuana smell in the car. And my dad comes in my room one night, and he goes, he just kind of basically confronted me, asking, was I smoking weed? And I said, man, no, I don't want to have anything to do with it. What are you talking about? And there was just this tension there. And he's like, well, we'll see. So I'm in his house. I'm a 30-year-old man at the time. fresh out of prison, trying to get my life together. And now, for some reason, the card smells like weed to my dad. And I knew I had not only not smoked weed, I don't like weed, and I didn't want to do drugs anymore. But then a week later, we went to go get his truck from my sister's husband. They're divorced now. It's a whole nother ball game there. But he's driving back home, and the Oakland police pull him over for speeding. And they said, we smell beer in the car. And so I'm in a car in front of my mom. I'm in a car with my mom in front of him. We see him get pulled over. We pull over. He calls her cell phone after they finally let him go with a ticket. And he said, put Danny on the phone. I'm Danny Jr. He's Danny Sr. He says, son, I got an apology to make to you. I said, what are you talking about, Dad? He said, I know what it feels like now to have walked in your room and said that. They were going to pull me out of the car thinking I'd been drinking because it smelled like beer. So God's got a humorous way of turning the stigma on its head. And not that we say, aha, see, I told you so, but it's like, if you know you're going after this thing to make a change in your life, you don't have anything to worry about if you know who you are now.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the A to D podcast with the interview with Danny Cosby, part 1. We will post part 2 on Monday. So for those of you who are listening today, you just have a couple of days till you can listen to part 2. Hope you enjoyed it. Please share with your friends, and see you next week.